Hi there, I just finished my last exam of my degree, possibly my last exam ever, and I want to talk about the word mosquito. You see, the etymology of the word mosquito is actually pretty cool, and it also ties into an idiomatic phrase in Spanish that I love very much and that I've been using for quite a while. This story all starts with a meme that I saw a while ago, which is funny but also closer to the truth than I think the poster of this meme realised it was, and certainly closer to the truth than I realised at the time that I first saw this meme. The meme said something like, the existence of mosquitoes implies the existence of a much bigger insect called a mosquito, which, as I said, fair play, it's pretty funny. I laughed when I first saw it, but I think I've seen this meme like a couple of times, and the second time that I saw it, there was a comment under this meme that said something like, actually, the hecho, like, this is true. It comes from not Moscow but mosca, which means fly, of course, in Spanish. And this is where we go on the lovely fun side tangent where I talk about the fun idiomatic Spanish phrase that I learned quite a while back. This was one of the first idiomatic phrases I learned in Spanish, and I just love it. The phrase is por si las moscas, which is basically the Spanish equivalent of saying just in case in English, but it literally means like in case of the flies. And if I remember rightly, it dates back to like the time, you know, before refrigerators and stuff, when like they had to preserve stuff in like brine and or ice. And so I think the phrase originated from the idea that like the flies were the biggest threat to the food and to keeping the food fresh. So like they would, I don't know, keep a curtain in front of the door to the room where the food was, por si las moscas, like just in case of the flies. Something like that. The point is, it's a really fun phrase and I love to use it, and I just get reminded of that whenever I think about mosquitoes and the idea that like a mosca, a fly, is just a giant mosquito. I know that's not how it actually works, but in my mind it does. However, when I was reading a bit around the etymology of the word mosquito to try and confirm that it is indeed just the diminutive of mosca, I discovered its etymology is even cooler than just that, because it's actually a cognate of the Italian word moschetti. I think that's what it is in Italian. They're both diminutive forms of their language's word for fly, which both come from the Latin musca, I think it was, which in turn comes from the Proto-Indo-European, which I have no idea how to pronounce. The final part of this puzzle that brings us to the coolest fact of all is moschette, the old Italian, is indirectly where we get the English word musket from. Moschette made its way into Old French as, I think it's like musket, so I have no idea how to pronounce the Old French, but it looks like this. And that is where we get musket from. I know nothing about guns, but I think a musket is a type of gun, and it's a doublet. It's a doublet. That's the linguistics term for like when the same origin word makes its way twice into a language via two different routes. The word mosquito came into English via Spanish, and the word musket came into English via Italian and then Old French, but they both share the same root word, that root word being the Latin word for fly, and the diminutive forms of its derivatives in Italian and Old Spanish. A final point I'd like to make is just how cool I find doublets in general as a concept, and some really specific examples are mind-blowing. A particularly fascinating example of doublets in English is cow and beef. Like many words for, you know, meat and a corresponding animal in English, the name for the meat comes from the Romance languages, whereas the name for the animal comes from the Germanic, because of, you know, the socio-linguistic situation of the fact that the people working with the animals would have been speaking a Germanic language at the time, whereas the people rich enough to be eating the animals would have been Normans speaking a form of French. But what I didn't know until very recently, and I assume many other people don't know as well, is these two words are actually a doublet. If you go far back enough, they share the same common ancestor, which is, I don't know why I paused like that, I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's this Proto-Indo-European word which gave rise to both the Romance forms that eventually gave rise to our word beef, and to the Germanic forms that eventually became our word cow and the German Kuh. And then I was like, now it makes sense where bovine comes from. The adjective corresponding to, you know, things to do with cows. That shouldn't have been, I should have realised that years ago. I should have connected that with the word beef, but I didn't. And I did today when I was reading about the etymology of cow and beef. And that was because I was reading about doublets. And that was because I was reading about mosquito and musket. So, in short, the word mosquito is really cool, but the animal mosquito is not. Remember that. That's my wise words from the day I hopefully passed my last exam ever.